Hi everyone and welcome to Back in Time Fiction. In today's video I have the immense pleasure of interviewing Angus Donald, easily one of the greatest historical fiction writers out there. Together we are going to discuss obviously historical fiction, his books, but also his life, because you will see that even though his stories are pretty cool, his lifestyle is quite amazing as well. And if this is your first time on Back in Time Fiction, again, welcome. My name is Baptiste. I am the author of the ongoing Three Kingdoms Chronicles series, which you can find on Amazon. And just like you, probably, I'm a big fan of historical fiction. Actually, if you consider yourself to be one, take a second to subscribe to this video and leave a comment just to say hi. That would be nice. Without further ado, let's chat with Angus Donald. Thank you very much for joining me, Angus. Really happy to
My
have
pleasure.
you. Very happy to have you on my channel, and we've chatted a bit over the last few weeks. So
Yes.
I'm really excited to interview you today and have a nice chat on historical fiction, your books, and all of this.
Great. Well, it's very good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm very much enjoying reading your book, Yellow Sky Revolt. I'm about 20 pages from finishing it. I was trying to finish it this morning, but stuff happened. So it's excellent work.
I'm very happy to know that you really like Yellow Sky Revolt. And 20 pages, you're almost done. The rest doesn't really matter.
Right.
So we will talk today about historical fictions, about your book, but I really want to start talking about you first of all, because I feel like your life, I mean, from what I could read on internet, on your website as well, I feel like your life could make a book by itself. It's been very interesting so far. So actually, is it in the process? Are you going to write your memoir at some point, Angus?
I don't know. I sometimes think about it, particularly as I get older. I'm now 57, and the memories of some of the more interesting times are fading.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if anybody would be interested. I mean, perhaps if I become very famous one day, who knows? But I think at the moment, maybe not at the moment. I have had some interesting experiences. I was in. I lived abroad for most of my life before I was 40. I was born in China. I think I mentioned that to you before. My parents were in the diplomatic service, the British diplomatic service. So my mother and father were in Beijing in 1965 when I was born. And I don't remember. Of course, I was a baby. I don't remember anything about it. But I've seen the old films of the Hutong and the sort of streets and what Beijing was like then. It's completely different now, of course. But that's old 60s China. Was very interesting to see. But we left after 1 year because of the Cultural Revolution, of course. So the Red Guards were shooting at our house, and we were part of the British embassy there. So we had to leave and go back to England. But I then, I grew up sort of, we went into France, then we went to Greece, then we went back to Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. In the 1970s for about 3 or 4 years, where my father was the political advisor, and I loved Hong Kong then. And I eventually went back in the 1990 to 95. I spent 5 years in Hong Kong just before the handover back to China. And that was fantastic. I was a journalist. I was working as a journalist there. And I also lived in Greece. I spent some time as a year as a beach bum in Crete, picking a little bit of fruit, sleeping on the beach, or sometimes in abandoned houses, having a wonderful time. I was 18 or 19. You don't care about anything then. You had a lovely time. There were lots of girls and booze and cheap food, and I worked when I felt like it and had no money at all. It was wonderful.
Oh, sounds absolutely amazing. Yeah, indeed.
And then I went. I've been I lived in India for a while. In Indonesia, I worked as an anthropologist studying magic. That was for about 6 months as just part of a student thing. was a war correspondent in Afghanistan for a bit. I lived in Pakistan and after India, Pakistan, and then Afghanistan for a bit during the war. And then about 40, my life stopped, and I came back to England.
Let's say that was a second step. It didn't stop.
Yes.
That's a next step.
Yes. Well, then I started writing historical fiction. So after sort of doing all sorts of interesting things for the first half of my adult life, I've done nothing since then. For the past 17 years, I've just sat in my little office in this garden and wrote books. So, but perhaps one day I'll get out again.
Oh, I'm sure you will. I'm actually a big fan of the writer Robert Law.
Yes.
And I feel like you have a lot in common with him in the sense that he was also a war correspondent. If I remember, in Vietnam, then later in Kosovo, I think Kosovo, in the 90s.
Yes, yeah.
And I think I read some interviews and he said the same, like he did a lot of stuff in the first part of his adult life, then calmed down and then realized he wanted to do some more, so he signed up again to be a war correspondent, and then he was like, yep, no, that's okay, that was enough. So I think that's something
I think
like historical.
Yeah, I mean, I knew he's dead now, Robert Lowe, unfortunately, but I knew him quite well, and he was actually very kind to me when I was starting to write, and I admired his Viking books very much. The ones that were wonderful. But we used to meet up from time to time and have dinner and have a drink and stuff. And he was very fiercely Scottish. I'm not so Scottish, but he was much more Scottish than me. Yeah, he was a wonderful man, very kind, very generous. He did a lot of reenactment. He used to dress up. I don't know if you ever saw him. He would dress up in the full Viking, with the shield and the sword and everything. But yes, he did. Yeah, I mean, I can't. To be honest, I don't think I could go back and be a war correspondent again. I can't run fast enough, and I've got much more to lose. When I was in Afghanistan, I had no wife, no children, no house. You know, I had nothing except a notebook and a laptop, and I was also quite unhappy. And I didn't really care if I lived or died. So I was maybe depressed, I think is a word for it. So I'm not in that state now. I'd mind very much if I died now, whereas at 40 or what was I, 38 or something, I didn't care. You know, I wanted to have excitement, and I didn't care if I, So just for people to understand, you went there right after 9/11. So I mean, in the aftermath of 9/11, right? Yes. Yeah. I was in Delhi. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was in Delhi. I was working for the Financial Times newspaper in Delhi, and I quit in, I think it was October 2001, which was just up. So September 2001 was the 9/11 thing. And the next month, I said, can I go to Afghanistan to report? Because we knew the war was coming. Can I go? And they said, no, you can't go. You've got to stay here. Someone else is going. So I said, okay, that's it. I quit. I wasn't very happy with them. So I then went to Pakistan and took an apartment in Pakistan, in Islamabad, waiting to go in. And we waited there for about 2 months or a month and a half, and then we're able to go in after that. But it was quite hairy at the beginning. A lot of journalists were being murdered by the Taliban, and the women raped and murdered, and the men tortured and then murdered. It was all very scary stuff. But it was kind of, it was interesting. I mean, I write about war now a lot. In fact, all my books are pretty much about war, and it's quite nice to have seen a bit of it, and to be able to say, yes, I have seen people being shot. I've been shot at myself. I've seen a lot of dead bodies. That kind of thing gives your writing, I think, a bit more authenticity. Though to be fair, I was only there for a few months, so it wasn't a long, it just got too dangerous.
I'm sure a few months is way enough to leave an impression that will last and that can be felt in the writing. So I have a few questions on your writing, actually. We'll get to there later. Yeah. So If I sum up, you've lived in well, a bunch of countries all over the world, in Europe, Asia, mostly, if I'm correct, mostly even Zaire, if I'm correct.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Among all those countries and all those cultures, which one would you say affected you the most? Which one had an impact on you, the strongest impact on you?
That's quite difficult to say. I mean, the top three, I'll give you three. China and Hong Kong had a deep impact on me because my family were always involved in China all the way through my life. And until recently, I haven't been back recently. But so China was always very large, loomed very large in my life. Greece, I love because that's where I was a beach bum and that's where I was young and free. And so I go back there and it's easy to get to, right, from England. So I go there with my family. I take my children to the place and say, that's where that abandoned house was where Daddy slept. And that's where, so it has an emotional, China for the intellectual, Greece for emotional, and for the just plain weird, Indonesia. Because I also spent some time there with my parents and then again on my own as an anthropologist in the 1980s when I was studying magic. And that was some of them, it's magic, witchcraft and sorcery for an anthropological degree, a master's degree in anthropology. So that was really interesting because I was looking at the world through the eyes of Indonesians who had a whole completely different way. I mean, the Chinese have a different way of looking at it, but these people were very much into their spirit world, magic, invisible witches, witch doctors who can transform themselves into beings. I mean, this is in the late 20th century, and there's still, I'm sure it's exactly the same now. It's still very strong. And you go to talk to people and you become immersed in this magical world, and you're looking around and you see cars and telephones and televisions and all the rest of it, but they're saying no, but look at the real world, which is full of demons and witches and magic and malice and gods, and so that was just incredible weird immersion into this strange world of Indonesia, which I love Indonesia, but I've only been back once. About 5 years ago, I went back to do some research on something, but I'd love, life's too short, the world's too big, there's so much to do.
So, if I'm correct, you used some of that experience researching magic in Indonesia in your book, Gates of Stone, right?
Yes.
I haven't read it yet, so don't spoil it. But can you share maybe one experience that inspired this book from your time in Indonesia?
Okay, it's inspired more than just Gates of Stone. Also, I'll come to that. Mm-hmm. Basically, spirit possession is something that's very big in Southeast Asia. You have it in, I was looking at some pictures today of Thailand, Malaysia, all over Indonesia, and particularly Bali, where I was staying. What they do is they use music and sometimes prayer, and they invite a spirit to come into their body, and it takes over their body, and they become possessed by this spirit. And it's a part of a religious, not a weird thing. It's part of a religious, well, it's weird for the outsider, but it's part of their religious experience. You might have Arjuna, who is the great prince of the great young warrior prince. He might come into an old lady, right? So you see this old woman of 60, 70, 80 years old, and suddenly she's strutting about like a prince because the spirit of Arjuna has come into her. Another man, might have a monkey, a monkey god come into, probably related to the Chinese journey to the West monkey, but come into them. That's Hanuman, his name is, and starts hopping around like a monkey in the middle of the temple. It's quite extraordinary. So I was really interested in this transition of states from being a normal person to being someone possessed by a demon or by a god or by a hero. And I used it as the basis of some of the magic in Gates of Stone, because I was thinking Gates of Stone is set in a sort of Indonesia-like area, a place where there's lots of pirates, lots of islands, and there's two great powers. There's a Chinese type power up to the north, and over to the west there's an India like power. So I was thinking of Indonesia as sort of half Chinese, half Indian, and it's these two colonial powers. It was quite interesting for me to flip the colonial thing, because of course the Chinese were colonizers, so were the Indians. It wasn't just us. And they were colonizing, and they still are, Southeast Asia. So it took place in a kind of Indonesia, so it made sense to use Indonesian style magic. But I've been using that experience a lot. I mean, it was 6 months, but that experience was so intense that I've used it again. And in the current series of books, which is about berserkers, we'll perhaps talk about them later, I use the experience of being possessed by an animal. Berserkers are people who believe that a spirit of a bear, there aren't any today. They believe there was a spirit of a bear that came into them and gave them the ferocity of a bear in battle, or the ferocity of a wolf or a bear. Sometimes some people say a wild boar as well.
The boar, yeah.
But I used the Southeast Asian experience of running amok. We have this expression in English which comes from Malay, running amok, which means to go. Do you know that one?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I didn't know it came from Indonesia, though. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a Malay word, amak.
Malay,
amok.
Sorry.
Yeah. What they say in Malaysia is that the spirit of a tiger comes into you, and it turns the person completely crazy, and they start killing everybody. And the only way that you can stop this is by killing the person who's run amok. And it happens more than you would think. It's like someone just snaps and goes completely crazy and starts killing everybody. So this is still a thing that goes on. There was the most famous mass example of this took place in the 1960s in Bali, when it was during the height of the sort of there was a risk that Indonesia would go communist. It was part of the sort of domino effect. The Vietnam War was sort of just starting up in Vietnam, and in Indonesia they had a dictator called Sukarno, who was a brutal dictator, and he was not a communist, but there were people who were communists, and he incited a witch hunt against communists, and ordinary villagers went completely crazy, and particularly in Bali, and started killing their neighbors. And it was just like a whole horrible bloody nightmare where they were hunting down people they suspected of being communists and slaughtering them in their beds and slaughtering the children. It was just and they all said, we went amok, we ran amok. And so it's quite recent history. This is a thing. And now they say that this, of course, is due to evil spirits coming into them, spirit of a tiger, spirit of a witch, or something like that. But it was also part of I could talk about this for hours, but it's part of a political thing where you have a witch hunt. The expression a witch hunt is hunting down witches. This was literally a witch hunt. They thought that these communists were possessed by evil witches and must be killed. So you have this incredibly powerful human experience of people being possessed by demons and it coming out as violence. And I think that a similar thing was going on with Viking berserkers, because they also harnessed this power of the bear or the wolf to make themselves. They didn't feel pain. They didn't get tired. They were completely crazy, and they often died. But they used this sort of supernatural. It's almost like superpower, But it's one that ends with you dying. So I was harnessing that for the Viking books. Yeah.
With the big difference compared to running amok, then it was their desire to transform into a berserker for a fight. So that was like a skill to be learned.
Well, except that probably in my books, because the hero, I don't want to keep killing the hero.
It happens to him, right?
Yeah, but also people who run amok in Southeast Asia, they are often people who have a lot of debts. You find that they've got a lot of debts, or they're being divorced by their wife, or they're very unhappy, and the only way they can express themselves is by this incredibly extreme suicidal and violent thing, because their life is so bad that they just, they go crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, you people today in England, there's a story about this man who shot his wife he got a shotgun. He killed his wife and his 2 children and then himself. Now, we're never going to know what this is. It's a terrible story. And he was a rich guy living in a big house in the country. And it's like, no, we're never going to know that story. We don't know what's going in his mind. They'll just say, well, he was disturbed and perhaps he had some problem. Obviously he had problems, but what's going on there? That's like, you're killing your wife and your 2 small children and yourself. It's very weird behavior. I mean, I would think that this human tendency still exists, and that was perhaps one of the ones that we harnessed in Viking times as well.
Well, I guess they also had their problems too. Yeah,
yeah, sure. Yeah.
So after all this experience, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, you went back to. I mean, you went to England. I don't know if we can say you went back to England, but you went to England, and in 2008 you landed this deal for 2 Robin Hood novels, and then from then on you didn't stop, and we have now 10 Robin Hood novels, correct? Plus 3 short novels in the same series. You wrote 3 novels set in Charles II time. Now you are going on with the 4th of your Viking story.
I've just finished the 4th one.
Congrats.
And I'm just about to start work on a new series about the Mongols.
Ooh.
Yeah,
interesting.
Because I'm very interested in the Mongols. I wanted to bring back some of my Asian soul. So I wanted to do something about Mongols and Genghis Khan or Chinggis Khan, and so I've got a series in mind which I have written a little bit of. I'm only just starting it, but that won't be ready for ages. But that's the next plan.
We absolutely need this series. I think everyone has been reading Connie Goulden's Conquest series for several times, and that's all we had about Genghis Khan. Now there has been some other interesting novels, but yeah, we need Angus Donald's take on the Mongolians. So I understand it might take ages, as you said, but don't wait too long. All right, we need this one.
Well, I've got a window. I have to do another Viking one. It's quite a tight deadline for my writing, so I've just finished this one. Yes, literally Friday, and I sent it off to my publisher, and it will come back in about a month, and I'll have to do some stuff, and then I'll send it off. But basically, it's done, and I have to start the next Viking one, so number 5, which is called, I forgot what it's called. I have to start the next one in September in order to finish it by March. So so September to March, I'll be writing the next one. So I have from now until September to write the first Mongol one. So it has to be done quite quickly. I've written 25,000 words. I've written a quarter of it already. So, it's not that hard. And I know what I'm going to do. I know the story. I know the characters.
Can you give us a little bit, like, what is it? Just a few one exclusivity here. Is it centered around Genghis Khan?
Yeah, it's a true story. It's a true story about an Englishman who fought for the Mongols.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I know, it's incredible, isn't it? He's a guy called Robert. We don't know what his other names were. And he was captured in 1241 outside the gates, outside Vienna. The Mongols, of course, came as far as Vienna in Austria, and they then stopped. They weren't stopped by the Christian knights. They were stopped by the death of their Khan back in Mongolia. And they all had to go back because there was a sort of parliament of all the great Khans had to go there to elect the next one. And traveling from Venice back to Karakorum, which is where Ogadai was, is a very long way. It's like 6 months, 3 months travel, 4 months travel, even if you're a Mongol. So they all realized the news didn't get to them for a long time, and they all realized if you didn't go back there, your faction wasn't going to get to be the great Khan, and you might even be outlawed or massacred or murdered. So they had to run back. They had to go back. So that's why they went back. But there was a skirmish outside Vienna. Various people say different places. I've picked on one. And during this skirmish, about 7 or 8 Mongols were captured, including one guy with blonde hair and like an English face. And the guy who captured him was the Duke of I forgot. It might have been the Duke of Austria himself. He captured him, and he recognized him because he had been the translator at a previous meeting between the Christians and the Mongols in Hungary. Sorry, I haven't quite got my head wrapped around it. I'm still thinking about the other book. But so he'd been, basically, this English guy had defected to the Mongols. He had risen up through the ranks of the Mongol until he was the equivalent of an ambassador. And then they used him to negotiate. He negotiated on behalf of the Mongols with the Christian Knights of Hungary. And the Duke of Austria was at that meeting and recognized the guy and then captured him later. And I don't want to say what happens to him because it spoils the book, but this is a true story about an Englishman who fought for the Mongols. So that's I think it's a really good idea.
That is extremely interesting. Yeah,
and I haven't got a publisher yet. So if any publishers are watching this, I'm really keen to get this happening, and I'll have something for you to read by September.
Awesome, but that's the thing. Like I felt. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I decided to start my career with Yellow Sky Revolt, so with books based in ancient China, is because you have this amazing pool of history in Asia or anywhere else in the world that hasn't been really tapped into by writers. And at the same time, now you have a lot of readers who want more stories based on those places. So yeah, I'm absolutely certain you will find a publisher in no time.
I hope so, and I absolutely agree with you as well. That's why I was interested in your book, Yellow Sky Revolt, was because I'd never seen anything written about that period. It's sort of 200 AD, isn't it? Something around there. And the Han rebellions and stuff. And I'd never read anything about that. And I knew that there was such a lot of rich history because I used to sort of memorize the dynasties and and who was emperor and all that kind of thing when I was a kid growing up. Because, my father expected us to know, when the Ming dynasty was. So I thought, what a great idea. But, okay, there's a but. I found with the Gates of Stone, it didn't do very well. And I don't really know why. A lot of people said how incredibly refreshing and original it was to set fantasy in Asia, but then they didn't buy the book. So it was kind of, I think I'm very interested to watch your career because I think we can get together and we can make Westerners writing about Asia.
Exactly.
I think. I mean, James Clavell. Do you know James Clavell?
Of course, yeah. Shogun,
and yeah. I mean, I loved Shogun and his Hong Kong ones as well, and I read them when I was growing up as a kid, and I thought they were brilliant. And they were bestsellers. They were absolutely fantastic. So I'm trying to do something similar with my Mongols, but there is a huge amount of untapped information. But it's getting people to read them. I mean, I have to admit, I think that a lot of historical fiction is quite boring because it's covering the same old stories. For British people, it's Hastings, 1066, Normans and Saxons, and then it's the Crusades or the Vikings, but only a small amount of Viking stuff only the Viking
in
stuff
England
pertains to England, whereas my Viking stuff is pre-England. So kind of like there seem to be only narrow bits of history that people are prepared to write about, and I really want to expand that, but I know that it's dangerous because if you stray outside what's recognized, people don't buy your books, and then you're in trouble. So, but I wish you very good luck with yours. I'm hoping that you'll blaze a trail and I can follow you.
Well, no, that's more likely to be the opposite, but yeah. So among all the books that you've written so far, which one is your favorite, and which one would you recommend people who don't know your work yet to start with?
I think it depends on the reader. My books tend to be quite violent and about battles. And if you like that kind of thing, then you should read The Last Berserker, which is the first in this new Viking thing, which is about berserkers. I've talked about berserkers. And it's also, I think, quite an interesting story. It's got some lovely characters, and it's not just all blood and gore. There's also a relationship that's between the two main characters, which is very interesting. So if you like battles, by The Last Berserker. If you don't, I've got a series that really is much nicer. It doesn't have any battles in it, or just very few. And that is the Blood trilogy. And the hero is a real person who I've described as slightly autistic. He's a guy called Holcroft Blood, who in fact is an ancestor of mine. And his father was Colonel Thomas Blood, and he stole the crown jewels of England from the Tower of London in 1671. And he got caught, and with his, he caught with his trousers full of jewels, which he'd taken from the Tower of London.
No, that's not me.
What crown? This crown? And you would expect that he would be immediately executed, but he wasn't. He demanded to speak to King Charles II. He said, I demand to have an interview. And what's even more extraordinary is the king said, okay. So can you imagine, I don't know, a major criminal, a mafiosi, or, some guy saying, I want to speak to the Emperor of Japan, and some Yakuza guy saying, I want to speak to the Emperor, and the king says, okay, fine, you just can't even imagine it. But he had this meeting. So Colonel Blood had this meeting one-to-one with King Charles II. No record of it exists, except that we know the meeting took place. No one knows what was said, but at the end of the meeting, Colonel Blood walked out with a full pardon, completely forgiven, and a grant of lands in Ireland worth £500 a year, which is a lot of money in those days. So basically, he walked out of there with a huge prize, and he wasn't going to be killed anymore. So what happened in that conversation is the subject of the book. And his son Holcroft, who then went on to be a very famous artillery general, which I haven't quite got to yet. He fought with the Duke of Marlborough at Blenheim and various other places. There's two main characters, and there's a trilogy of books so far. There may be a fourth one later on. He is a very sensitive autistic boy who's brilliant at maths. So he's a kind of maths genius, a bit like Rain Man, if you remember of course, Dustin Hoffman. A little bit like that. And he's into codes. He does codes and maths, and eventually becomes an artillery gunner, because you had to do all the calculations for the artillery. For pointing the gun up and down, you have to do all the calculations in your head so the gun goes in the right thing. So that one is less battly and quite sweet. And I think Holcroft Blood's a rather nice character to get into if you don't like the battles. So that one's called Blood's Game, if you want no battles, and The Last Berserker if you want battles.
So currently, I am reading The Last Berserker. That's my ongoing book.
Yes.
Like when we scheduled this interview, I was like, I need to read this one, because I have read the first of your Robin Hood books, which I absolutely loved. It was actually the book that got me out of my longest reader block. I don't know if that's a word.
Right.
I couldn't I couldn't read for 3 or 4 months as I prepared to publish my book, and I picked a bunch of books, but the one that really got me out of it was your book. So I really liked it. Now, because of my channel, I rarely go to second book anymore because I want to discover more writers, more
Sure,
stories.
yes, yeah.
So, but it's definitely in my.
Well, I'm so glad it helped you. That's very nice to
No,
hear.
no, that was. I mean, thank you. I'm the one who is very grateful about this. And then I decided to read. Sorry, the Last Berserker. I've read so much Viking stories in the past 6-7 years that I kind of stopped. I didn't want at some point. So that's the first Viking story I've read in a long time, and it is very good. If anyone out there wants to read stories about Vikings that are not set in England, give a shot to The Last Berserker. It's amazing. And the only other one that I mean, there are a bunch of very good Viking stories that are not set in England. I think the Robert Law Vikings are very good. Giles Christian's Rise of Sigurd was also very good about this. Like, it's really Scandinavians together. It's not even Vikings in your case, right? It's just before Vikings, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's Saxons. It's basically pagans versus Christians. It's Saxons who I was looking at them and I was thinking they're pretty much Vikings, because the Saxons and the Danes were very closely allied, and there was a lot of mixing, and their language was the same root and very similar. And if they're mixing with each other, they probably understood each other. They both worship the same gods, Woden, Odin and Thor and Freya and all those ones. And so their cultures were incredibly similar. But and the people they were fighting were the Franks under Charlemagne. And Charlemagne, I think, is a very interesting character who apparently slept with his daughters, though I haven't touched on that in the book. But also his brutality in the name of Christianity is quite extraordinary. I mean, he had something like 4,500 Saxon prisoners, and he just ordered them all executed, but for no particular reason. Maybe they were just difficult to feed, or he didn't know what to do with them. I mean, that quite often happens when you have prisoners. You need to feed them, you need to guard them, and if you can't afford to do that, you just execute them. But it's still a really brutal way to deal with people. And he was the good guy, he was the Christian, and the pagans were supposed to be the bad ones. So I just thought this conflict, and it took 30 years for him to conquer Saxony, which, if people don't know, is the part of Germany just below Denmark, that northern bit of Hamburg around that area, Saxony. And it took him 30 years because he kept subduing these Saxons, and then they would rebel again and come back again. And they had a very charismatic leader, a guy called Widukind, who kept bringing them back up and saying, come on, we've got to resist these guys over 30 years. And eventually he lost, and they became part of Charlemagne's empire. But it was a very long and heroic struggle. But it's not quite Vikings. It's more sort of just before Viking period.
Right. They didn't go a Viking yet.
In book 3, they go off to find a magic sword. So that's Viking. And then in this one, I've just written, book 4, it's about a famous battle between the Danes and the Swedes, a legendary battle in about the 7th, 8th century, again before Vikings. And the 5th one, the one I start in September, will be going to England. They are actually going to England to do some proper Viking. But
so I think we had a small chat on Twitter about this, but my very, very first historical fiction novel was actually about the same time period and characters, which is Wartooth, and I forgot his enemy,
Sigurd Ring.
Sigurd. So he's more from the Russian side to begin with, according to different legends and all of this. This is a very exciting time that hasn't been written on too much.
No. Well, there's one guy, a friend of mine. Actually, I got the idea from a friend of mine called Theodore Brunn. Do you know him?
Yeah, just by name, yeah. I haven't read.
Well, he wrote about this same battle, and I read about it, and I'm afraid I've taken his idea. I've spoken to him, and he says it's fine. He doesn't mind. I mean, it's completely different from his story, but this was the battle of the period that we're both writing about. So it's like doing Hastings. Lots of people do Battle of Hastings. Yeah. So, but he's very good. His one. It's called. What it's called. I can't remember. Theodore Brunn. Anyway, is one of his. I think it's A Mighty Wind, possibly. But
All right. Well, with all those stories, Vikings, Charles II time, now the Mongolia, I have to ask, when do you write a good ancient Rome novel? I've heard you're a big fan of this.
I kind of I decided at the beginning of my career, there were lots of people, Ben Kane, lots of people were doing Viking books. I mean, I know half a dozen people doing Roman books. And there just seemed to be so many of them. And I thought that the public must tire of Roman stories, but they haven't. It keeps on going and they keep on doing it. And I read one recently, a very good Roman book set in Britain. But I like to do original stuff. I try to do things that other people haven't done. So, the Englishmen fighting for the Mongols, that's new. Vikings, but not Vikings, but they're actually Saxons and Franks battling over North Germany. That's kind of I like to take the thing and then go slightly off. So, what else? Yeah, this guy, Holcroft Blood, is a guy in Charles II, but he's autistic. Just like shift it slightly to make it interesting. And my Robin Hood, of course, is a gangster. He's not a good guy; he's a bad guy, and that's what makes him interesting. So I always like to try and do the main target and then shift it off because it makes it interesting for me to write. Otherwise, if I'm just writing the same old stuff that everybody else is doing, it gets really boring for me. And if it's boring for me, it'll be boring for the reader. So, that's what I'm hoping.
I was mostly joking because I knew your take on the ancient Rome genre. So no problem.
I don't know how I could make unless I did it from the point of view of a slave or something, or I don't know how I would do Rome. I mean, I'd love to have the money and I'd love to have the sales that you get from Roman books, but I can't see how I could do it.
So once again, I'm going to repeat myself, but Robert Law's Brotherhoods of the Sens, I think with the S, was quite fantastic in this idea that there was ancient Rome at the end of Rome, and he sends those characters in like Scotland and then in towards Persia and then in different places, but almost beside the last book, they don't really spend time in Rome itself. And that was quite brilliant in the way it was done. It was ancient Rome story without being ancient Rome, really. And I quite liked it. That was a very
That's good. I didn't read that one. I don't know that one. I know his Viking ones, and I read a couple of his Scottish ones, which were quite difficult to read.
I tried. I mean, I love this writer, but when he went into Scotland, either for the lion rampant,
the lion.
Yeah, something like this. Those are too difficult. He knows his topic too much, and I don't. So I couldn't get into.
No, I couldn't. I tried. You have to read it, work out what it's going to sound like, then work out what that sound is going to be like in Scots, and then work out what that is in English, and that completely stops your flow of reading. You need to zip through, I think, anyway.
A little bit. And the first chapter was done with a lot of intentional head jumping. It was like watching a TV show with the point of view going around the same scene but from different characters. That was brilliant, but that took me a while to really appreciate this first chapter. Whereas his Viking story and this one, so the ancient Rome one, the Brotherhood of the Sens, the Brothers of the Sens, I forgot the exact name, was really good because it's easy to get into in comparison to his Scottish stories. So that was my fresh take on Rome that I really enjoed. Even though I enjoyed plenty more. Yeah, please give it a try. You'll see.
Yeah, steal the idea.
That too. Yeah.
I kind of think though. I mean, talking about head jumping, going from head to head, I don't like that because if you confuse your reader, you've lost him. If you confuse, I have everybody's busy, everybody's got a lot of time. I read in bed at night usually, and I'm quite tired. So if I'm confused, then I'm not going to bother reading it. And if my memory is that book was very confusing, it doesn't get picked up again. So I mean, you have to find a balance, as with everything in life, between making it interesting and intelligent and sophisticated, but not too complicated. So it's finding out where that is. It is the thing to do, because otherwise, I'm very careful with the words I use as well. I try to pick plainer words rather than more. I mean, I've got a big vocabulary and I could use all sorts of different words, but I don't choose to, because actually a short word is a short, plain, ordinary word gets the thing across better than using a complicated word.
But on my side, it's much easier because I don't have the vocabulary that you have in English. So when I write, I keep it simple.
Baptiste, can I ask you why you write in English and not in French?
You know what? That's actually the first time since I got this book out that someone asked me. So thank you. First, there are more people reading in English. So the market is much bigger. Second, I just prefer English, to be honest. It just flows better in a novel. Now, in terms of vocabulary, I feel like French has a lot of... It's very rich. French is very rich when it comes to vocabulary. You can say probably a lot more detailed stuff in French, maybe. But English, when you want to tell a story, English is, I don't know, it flows better. And plus French is just so goddamn complicated. So the grammar, the spelling, it's too tricky. Yeah. Plus all the books I loved the most as a reader, I read them in English. So I read so much in English, for me it was natural to use English to write a book.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's very interesting. Yeah. So, and what are you planning? Can I ask, if you don't mind? I'm very curious. I love the first Yellow Sky one, and I'm looking forward to the second one. And there's 3. It's a trilogy. But what are you going to do? Is it?
Oh no, it's actually 10 books.
10. Oh my God!
It's planned. So the plot is goes along 10 books plus 2 novellas, because I break.
Okay. Oh right. Okay. Good. You're going for it.
So I'm breaking the series into 3 cycles, 3 arcs, and the first arc, second arc are going to end with a novella each. To kind of close the arc nicely with a very different kind of story. So altogether it's 12 titles for this series.
Wow.
There is a spin-off as well in the work that is set during book 3. So there is a bunch of things going on with this one.
How fast do you write?
So Yellow Sky Revolt, I wrote it in about 3 weeks.
Wow.
And of course, the first draft, right? So the first draft, I wrote it in about 3 weeks. And then I spent 2 months re-editing it. Then I sent it to 2 editors. So it went through a copy editor, then a proofreader. And the second one, I wrote it in about 2 weeks. That was the fastest book I've written so far. Now the third one,
amazing. That's astonishingly fast. I thought I was fast. It takes me 5 months to write one. I thought that was quick, but
so this doesn't mean it's a good quality or whatever, right? It
is a good quality. It's very good quality. It's excellent.
So the third one, because I wrote the third one while preparing the publication of the first one, it took me a little bit longer, maybe 2 months and something, a bit under 2 months. So so it really depends.
Well, that's amazing. So that's all in 1 year. You've written 3 books.
Yeah, actually, last year I wrote 4 books altogether. Another book was for another story that I plan to publish maybe for Christmas, if I have the time and the budget.
How many have you written in total? How many have you written altogether?
9 books. I believe I'm on my 9th right now. I'm already writing the 9th book. Which is actually the novella that will end the first cycle of the 3 Kingdoms Chronicles. So I wrote 1 book for a Viking story, like the one we mentioned, a trilogy about Scandinavian mythology. So the retelling of Ragnarok from the point of view of a dead warrior in the army of Odin. So one of those soldiers who go into Valhalla. So, Ragnarok from the point of view of this guy. And then
that's a great idea. That's a terrific idea.
So same, if any publisher is watching, this is the one I would like. So I'm self-published so far, but the Viking one, the Scandinavian one, mythology one, I would like to get a publisher. That would be fun to work on this.
Good. That sounds great.
Sorry, that's not a video about me. Let's go back. So I was checking Amazon for your books, and all of them have over 4 stars of rating. And on most of them you have several hundreds, maybe thousands of ratings for the most popular ones. So can you tell us what is your secret? How do you do what makes a good Angus Donald book?
I think it's character. I think it's the character of the people, the protagonists. So I like in the Fireborn series, The Last Berserker and the other 3 or 4 after that. I've got 2 really strong characters. I've got this guy Bjarki, who is a little bit stupid but nice and decent and goes berserker, right?
Yeah.
And his companion is Torfina, or Tor, and she is the opposite of him: small, female, very fiery, rude, really rude to people all the time, but and quite unhappy, actually. I think one of the things I like about it is that she's very unhappy because she can't be the person that she wants to be, whereas he just is trying to be a decent guy. But the interplay between them and the affection between them is really nice, and I think that's what works. And a lot of people have said that they enjoy the characters, the interplay. I mean, there's the violence and the blood and the battles and the excitement and stuff, but I think it's actually about characters. And with the Robin Hood books, Robin Hood wasn't the hero. Robin Hood was one of the main characters, but the hero was Alan Dale, who was a young man. Going through the 10 books, he becomes an old man, but at the beginning, and he really wanted to believe in Robin Hood, and then served Robin Hood and promised to serve him, and then discovered that Robin Hood actually was a complete bastard. But he was locked in this relationship with Robin Hood, and was then trying to make Robin Hood a better guy. And we find that actually towards the end of the series, Robin Hood is becoming more like the Robin Hood we know. But again, it's about the tension and the relationship between these 2 characters who are constantly fighting, or, trying to sort of not, stab each other. That, I think, gave this series its strength. So I think it's about character. I mean, I have to admit, I write to a sort of a formula these days. I take a piece of A4 paper, I grab a piece of A4 paper and I draw 2 lines in the middle, and then you have Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. And I know that at the end of Act 1, you have to have a twist where the whole thing goes in a different direction. At the end of Act 2, you have to have a disaster, a catastrophe around there where they're all captured by the bad guys, or they realize that they're all going to die or whatever. And then through Act 3, you're rising again to a climax, and then a little something at the end. So I have a sort of way of plotting out every book that I've evolved. The first one isn't like that, and the second one isn't really like that either. But then once I got into it, I realized, okay, that's quite a good way of doing it. For the third one, either. But now I'm now writing number 19, so I've kind of got it. So it helps me having this structure, because I know, okay, and I do 100,000 word book and 10 chapters in 3, which gives you 30 chapters, each of about 3,000 words, which gives you 90. Gives you 90,000 words, and then another 10 you'll need for filling in and putting bits in and putting in an extra chapter there. So you end up at about 100,000. So it's kind of I've got into the habit of doing it now. I don't know what makes them successful. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I've just been lucky, or I'm doing a good job. I don't really know how to explain it.
There is no secret that I can steal here. No, too bad. So yeah, the 3 acts. So that's like Aristotle's poetic system, like beginning, middle, and the end. Yeah. All right.
Exactly. I mean, there's nothing very. I suppose clear language. Remember never to confuse. Don't ever confuse your audience, because they'll go away. Make sure you end with a satisfying One thing that people are doing now, which a lot of readers find very annoying, is they're writing a really long book, like 200,000 words or 250, and they cut it in half and they publish the first half and then they publish the second. Don't do that, because if you get to the end of the book and it hasn't been resolved, you don't feel like buying the next book. You just feel angry at the guy who has left you hanging there without resolving some of the things. I mean, I don't know. I remember someone complaining about this to me, but I always try and wrap up the story, but leave some other little bits still going on so that you can pick them up for the next one and carry on. Write a series is a good idea, because then you get people going. But I don't think there's one great secret. Try and be entertaining. That's it, really.
So I can feel like there's a lot going on with the dynamics between the main 2 or 3 characters in your books. The Robin Hood is a very good example, like you say, with Alan Dale interacting with Robin Hood himself, but also with all the other members of the gang, and you can feel he stays connected with Robin Hood through those other characters who maybe are easier to appreciate than Robin Hood himself. They are easier to approach for this new young guy, and I know that's the part that I really liked, especially at the beginning, is how he very quickly relates to brother Tuck, right? Forgot if that was if that's the pronunciation, and some others within the gang. Now, same like you said, the dynamics in your Viking story, the dynamics between Thor and the Berserker is really interesting, especially how it starts not in a very good way. She doesn't really like him at first for easily understandable reason. Yeah. So that's really interesting. Can I
have you finished it yet? Or
no, not yet. Don't spoil.
Okay, I won't tell you what happens.
I'm about 60% in, I think. I used to be a very fast reader. I am no longer that. I have to.
No, I find it very difficult. It's difficult when you're writing books. People ask you to read them. I mean, I'm very happy to have read yours, and and I loved it, and I'm going to nearly finish it. But it's quite difficult sometimes. I know you were talking about a reading drought. I mean, I've go through periods like that where I just can't bear to read books because I'm so full of my own stories, and I spend all day typing and reading my own stuff, and then to go and start reading somebody else's. There's another thing that I do is that sometimes I read someone else's book, and if it's much better than mine, I hate them.
I know.
You think, you bastard, why are you so much better than me?
Absolutely. And at the same time, when you are writing, especially when you are editing, I mean, I know I am. When I am editing and I read a book, I don't have the same pleasure as usual, and I'm always trying to fix it. Like, I wouldn't have said it like this. I wouldn't have used this word. I read this word 2 lines before. It's annoying. I don't want to read a book like this.
And that's exactly right. I mean, because it's, you are still in work mode. You're still as if it was your own manuscript that you're editing.
Yeah.
And sometimes when somebody gets in with historical fiction, the other thing I find is when someone gets something wrong. I was reading a Viking book, I won't say which one, recently. Somebody sent it to me to read, and I read it, and halfway through they were eating potatoes, and it just really annoyed me, because we know that potatoes didn't come over until the 16th century with the discovery of the Americas. So to have Vikings chomping down on potatoes, and it just annoyed me so much I couldn't finish the book. So I said, I'm not going to review this book, because I said, look, you've got potatoes on page 23. I'm not reading anymore. Yeah. But and fix it if you want to, but I can't read it. And the other one that annoyed me is, and this is a very obscure one, and it's in a very famous historical fiction book, but the first page describes somebody and says he had the color of a freshly peeled, his hair was the color of a freshly peeled carrot, right? This is set in the 12th century. And in the 12th century, carrots were purple or white. So they weren't orange. That was invented by the House of Orange in Holland or the Netherlands in the sort of 16th century, 17th century. And so basically, he was saying the guy had purple hair. Yeah. And it's just, I was thinking, God.
that's a very obscure one. I could easily see myself writing this.
Well, spread the word. No carrots.
All right, interesting. Now, I know, like, when I started writing Yellow Sky Revolt, there are basically two topics that I decided I couldn't stand researching. One is clothes. I don't like books that describe clothes too much.
No.
That's why I'm not the biggest fan of George Martin because of that. He's giving me too much information about what people wear, like in a game.
George R.R. Martin.
Yeah. So
I didn't notice the clothes, but I never do clothes either. I say tunic,
exactly.
Cloak.
I'm keeping it. I'm
always.
I'm trying to keep it very vague for that reason. And the second one is food, which is always very difficult to approach. And one of the first pages of Yellow Sky Revolt, I said that the character are eating pork
millet
cooked in oil. No, millet is fine. I know. I said pork cooked in oil or chicken cooked in oil. I forgot, and I sent it to beta readers from China, and one of them said no, they didn't cook anything in oil back then, and I'm like, it's not because we don't have a proof that they did.
Right.
That they actually didn't. And this is what is so difficult with food, especially with recipes, because we don't have many proofs. We don't really know what they used to cook or how they used to cook. So I try not to put too much food in my historical fiction for that. But the carrots being purple, I had no idea. I did grow purple carrots in my garden in the past, but I didn't know that was actually historical, and the orange ones were the modern.
Well, the House of Orange is the royal house of Holland, or possibly the Netherlands, and so in order to honour their princes who are from the House of Orange, Orange is of course in France, down the bottom of France, but they bred this special carrot using purple and white carrots that they managed to do it, or reddish ones. And they said, ta-da, here's our tribute to the House of Orange, orange carrots. And so, that was
interesting.
Yeah.
So can I ask, in the genre, historical fiction, what are your favorite writers or your favorite books, maybe?
I think Flashman, George MacDonald Fraser, those are, I think, the best, or the funniest. The best in terms of capturing the mood of the period is Patrick O'Brian, who wrote a series of naval novels about the life in the British Navy during the Napoleonic Wars, the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. And he's just got, you really believe that you're with these people, and their language is absolutely spot on. The sailing terms are mysterious because I don't sail, and I've no idea what this thing is, but it's just it's so well presented. I think what he did was he took the logbooks that every captain had to keep and like took big chunks out and put them in, which gives it an incredible authenticity. And he's got the attitudes of the day right, and the bravery, and it's a series, the Aubrey Maturin, it's a series about a friendship between these two men, and that makes it very powerful because they're such opposites, and they're also so kind of like committed to each other, that it's a really nice, strong friendship, and it's brilliant. And the books are so authentic. So I think Patrick O'Brian, George MacDonald Fraser. The woman who got me into historical fiction in the first place was Mary Renault, who did a series of books about the Greeks, ancient Greeks. And I absolutely loved those. When I was a kid growing up, I'd read those ones, and I just thought, wow, this is fantastic. But the person who basically made me believe that I could do it was Bernard Cornwell, because I read him as a student at university, and I thought I could do this. I could write. It's not difficult. It's not like complicated writing. It's not masses of research. I thought I could write like this, and I could do this, and then I kind of basically copied his style, which has become my style. So Bernard Cornwell was really, but I don't read him that much anymore because I again, for the same reason we were talking about, that life, when we have a writing life, reading is, I kind of tend to watch television or listen to the radio. rather than reading after I've spent all day reading my own stuff and writing it.
Plus, Bernard Cornwell, by his own words, admits that he tends to reuse the same tropes or even characters. Like the Starbuck Chronicle is basically Sharp, but in America, and that's what he said. I'm not saying it. I didn't read any of it.
Well, the Sharp one, the Starbuck one, I think didn't sell very well. It didn't do very well in America. I don't know why. It was I read some of them. They were pretty good, I thought. But I got bored with his Uhtred ones after I read about 3 of them, and then they just became the same thing again and again. He was always on one side, then he'd swap sides, and then there'd be a big battle, and it kind of got a bit boring. I mean, the thing is that Bernard Cornwell must have written 50 books, you know, and there's only so many a man can write in his life without kind of using the same. I mean, I find I'm already using some of the same things in battle scenes. I don't remember; it all just pours out. But I'm thinking, how many times have I used, you know, hack / swipe, you know, in this thing, and people's heads get cut off and legs get, you know. So it's just there is a repetitiveness to it, but. You know.
I completely get it, and I only have one book out, and the second one coming, and I already have some reviewers telling me my characters sound sometimes a lot like Uhtred, so I will need to provide a little bit from that, I guess, at some point.
If I could say one thing, I loved Yellow Sky Revolt. It's great, but because I put it down and picked it up again, I forgot who the characters were. And because the Chinese names are not very familiar, and particularly as the main hero's name changes. That from Dun to Chun to, you know, and then it's like, oh shit, you know, and I kind of got a bit, it slowed me down. I got back into it, but it slowed me down a bit. And I had a suggestion. I was thinking maybe you could give them nicknames, like the tiger, or, you know, or something like, or, you know, the horse that runs 10,000 miles or something, or, you know, old horse or something, because it's easier to remember old horse than, you know, young Chan, you know, or whatever it is. And for the Western reader, old horse has a resonance beyond young Chan. That's not one of your characters. That's actually a woman writer who I interviewed once. But if you call the guy Old Horse, then you've got a sense of his long face and his, you know, this sort of gives you an extra thing. It was just if you forgive me for throwing that out, the thought, you know.
No, I mean, I'm really happy to know how you felt about this, and this is not the first time I hear that, you know, Chinese names. Plus, they tend to there are not so many family names in China, so
100, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a bit more than this, but you have the 100 most common ones that tend to reappear a lot. Now, from book 2, I used a lot more nicknames. Okay. Especially for the characters that I create myself that don't come from history, so it's not as easy to confuse them. So yeah, don't worry, I'm aware of this.
Okay, that's good. No, I mean, it's a very minor criticism. I mean, it's a terrific book, and you should be very proud of yourself.
Oh, I am.
Yeah, good.
But, you know, I'm French. It's part of my personality to be proud of myself.
Rightly so.
So one last question for you. Do you have any writing tip for new writers, or let's say writers with just one book out, or just people who are thinking about writing in the historical fiction genre?
Yes.
So you already mentioned a bunch today.
Well, no, I was thinking there's one thing that I think that it is very useful, but it's very difficult to achieve, and that is time. The best books or the best writing I've done is writing that I've done and then put down and forgotten about and picked up months or possibly even years later, because when you're really into it. I don't get to do this enough. I would love to press pause on the world and have a year where I did something else and then come back and look at the book I've just written, because I'm sure it would be much better, but I don't have time for that. I've got to send it off and I'll get a month and then it'll come back, and then, but putting a bit of time, if you possibly can, between the writing of something and the editing of it, that is very, very valuable. Even if it's only a month, if you can put it down and do something else for a month and then come back to it a month later, or better still, a year later, then that's a very valuable tool, because your own brain will tell you which bits work and which bits don't. You also spot all the typos and things that you've got. I mean, that's less important because you can get a proofreader to do that. But you'll see, you'll be able to look at character development better, pacing, how slow or quickly the novel is moving along, whether it needs something uplifting at this point here, or whether that's too much and needs to be taken down. It all becomes clearer if you put it in a drawer for you and come back to it. Also, you might find, my God, this is absolutely brilliant. Sometimes you look at something you wrote a year ago and you think, who wrote that? Who wrote this amazing piece of literature? And that's always nice. So yeah, if you can put some time between the writing and the editing, or the writing and the publishing of your books, that's my top tip.
Oh, that's very interesting. I think that's what happened to the book I'm planning to publish by the end of this year, which I kind of wrote as a buffer because I just had finished my trilogy that is quite heavily, a lot of tension, and I wanted to write something a bit more humoristic. And I finished it and I was like, nah, this is not great, it's a bit immature. And I was like, let's start writing about Three Kingdoms Chronicles. And then like 2 months ago, I wasn't sure which of my previous stories I would publish next. Then I read this one that I just wrote like for fun, and actually it's pretty good. I love the main character's voice. I didn't realize that I liked it as much as I wrote it. So yeah, thanks for the advice. It works. So thank you very much, Angus. I've taken a lot of your time. Very
Not
grateful.
at all. Baptiste, it's been fantastic. Great to talk to you. And perhaps one day we can meet in the flesh and have
I would love to.
beer or something, or a glass of wine, whatever.
No, beer.
Perhaps.
I'm not from the south. I'm from the northern tip of France.
We'll have a pint of beer together. That would be very nice.
Excellent.
Okay.
So looking forward to it.
Take care.
Thank you very much. And looking forward for the next books.
Yes. Good luck with yours.
Thank you.